Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back continuing on my series on International Series of The Amazing Race. Now, I've already done a season ranking for Amazing Race Canada, and here I'll be doing season ranking for Amazing Race Australia, which just recently ended its 6th season, which happened. And really in general, Amazing Race Australia is a series that I do struggle to really get into. I do feel like there's been one truly elite season of the show, another good season of the show, and then the rest are just pretty bad for varying different types of reasons. And because that, for me, I do feel like the Amazing Race Canada is probably the superior product of the two, even though Amazing Race Australia probably has higher highs. But again, let's get around the ranking the seasons. We have 6 of them to rank here, and at the bottom, the worst season of Amazing Race Australia to me is the most recent season. It's the Amazing Race Australia 6, which, again, it happened. Really, for me, I feel like I struggled to care for a lot of this season. It's weird because I do feel like they fixed some of the issues that were there season 5, where season 5 had a wide range of non-elimination episodes. And Amazing Race Australia 6 here does fix that to a degree. I mean, we have a much bigger cast, a 20-person cast with only 21 episodes. So through that, less non-eliminations. We also had an interesting start to the season where we're split up into 2 separate groups, which I think allowed us to get to know most of these people better. But I do feel like they merged them a bit quick. I was not expecting them to merge at 18. That was kind of ridiculous and really just left to a lot of teams still being overshadowed. And really, I just do not think this was that good of a cast to begin with. And I really just did not care by the halfway point of the season, and part of that has to do with all the issues they had with COVID, where, again, like even the host, Bo, got COVID and had to be taken out for a few episodes, in one episode with which he is replaced by a robot, which is funny, but just ridiculous. And I love how, like, he ends up actually being replaced by Scott Tweedy, who is just really boring and awkward, and again, did not like him as the host. And really just in general, I haven't talked about Bo, but not a big Bo fan either. I don't like how handsy and how overly enthusiastic he is, though realistically I do think he's gotten better since his start. But even beyond the host, again, we had teams being kicked out for COVID left and right, being put into quarantine, being re-added to the game, and all this just felt very wonky. It made this season really just feel totally unfair. I mean, it was ridiculous. Like, we had teams losing out on like 6 legs, with Kathy and Chase being eliminated in episode 10 despite only participating in 3 legs, which is ridiculous. We had this massive grouping of 5 teams that missed out on 4 legs in a row, to which by episode 13 we were left with the final 5, only for 4 of those teams to come back in the following episode, which was ridiculous. And really, again, like, I do feel like these teams getting kicked out and re-added due to COVID led to just very wonky results across the season, where like one of the strongest teams of the season, Flickin' Gabby, ended up technically getting 10th place. We had a point where like Angel couldn't get on a flight due to COVID restrictions and had to be flown on a different flight, so Frankie had to race half of a leg by himself, and that was so dumb. Again, COVID really made this season something I just really could not take seriously. I will say, I do think this show had a decent start. I did feel bad for like Jake and Holly, who got eliminated very early on, where they end up coming in first but had to take a penalty, to which they had like an equalizer immediately after their penalty, so that really screwed them over, and they go from first to literally 18th place, which is ridiculous that they literally only had a 30-minute penalty and all 18 teams checked in within 30 minutes. Like, that just seems ridiculous. And really, that's the thing with Amazing Race Australia, too, is that it does feel like the course design is very structured to where it's very tough for people to truly get lost. And it seems like they're all like extremely close to each other the entire time. Again, it really just like that. Again, you got Heath and Tony as the winners, most blatant winner at it by the end of it, like very clearly going to win. And it feels like a story we just had with Amazing Race Canada. Now, I do think this one actually probably felt a bit more impactful, considering it was a husband and wife duo, but still, it's the same story. I did like teams like, again, Flickin' Gabby, Paco and Maury were fun. I liked Angel and Frankie to start, though I think they kind of petered out towards the end. Love Chelsea and Jameis. I thought they had a fun dynamic. But really outside of that, I do feel like a lot of these teams are super unnotable. And like a lot of that comes from because like those were a lot of the teams that got kicked out due to COVID. Either that or were early boots. So obviously the teams that stayed in the race the entire time are just teams that stand out to me, where I feel like most of the other teams just really didn't bring that much to the table for me. So again, like I feel like as a whole, again, really just a season that I struggled to care throughout a lot of it with, again, already the Australian format of reality television is something that I don't particularly like, but when adding that into, again, a pretty soulless cast and a pretty boring race in my opinion. Again, it leaves this as the worst season of the race for me. Next up, number 5, we're still at a season I really did not like, and that is The Amazing Race Australia 4. And I think what makes this one even worse is the fact that this is actually a traditional Amazing Race season, where again, AU6 is bad, but also it's like not a traditionally formatted season. It's not like the US or Canada, these like 12, 13 episode style of seasons, but this is. And the fact that this is this bad, despite being a traditional format season, is, again, pretty indicative of how mediocre I feel like it is. And again, this is another season I really just struggled to care for a lot of it. I really did not like any of these teams. Again, like for me, I did not like Bo on this season. I feel like he was just extremely awkward to watch. Though he's not boring, so at least there's that. I mean, you have like a couple notable teams early on. And again, Alana and Nico were kind of fun first boots considering how bad they were. I mean, you have Sid and Ash who were like fine villains, but like really nothing we haven't seen before. I did like Haley and Michaela, though they kind of get eliminated unceremoniously. You obviously have the dominance of Tom and Tyler across the season, which could have potentially been interesting. It's just the fact that they're two of the most boring people to ever be on their show, which obviously makes that not super notable, though they have a really strong run there. And I did feel like they had a great downfall. I feel like, to me, that's the best part of this season, is the tail end of it. I do feel like the last couple episodes got a bit better, especially when we did have Viv and Joey and Jerome and Jasmine end up flipping on Tom and Tyler by voting him for a U-turn, and they end up barely going home. And again, that was all really great. I do feel like that was for sure the best part of the season. The problem is that the rest of the season was just something I did not care about. Though I was fine with a Tim and Rod win. I mean, I feel like Viv and Joey probably would have been the more satisfying win, in my opinion, from like a storyline perspective, but Tim and Rod were fine as well. I mean, Jerome and Jasmine I found extremely boring. Though I will say that there's an aspect of the Tim and Rod win that does come off as anticlimactic to me, considering how propped up Viv and Joey and Jerome and Jasmine had been in the edit of giving them these really sympathetic storylines, and only for them to lose to Tim and Rod, who didn't really have that. I feel like that felt kind of weird to me, but as a whole, like it's a very meh season of the show. I feel like the first like 2/3 of the season, I really just did not care about most that was going on. But again, the tail end got better, but still not good enough. I still don't find this season super notable, and it's here at number 5. Now, number 4, we're moving on to a season that everyone hates. And again, I don't like this season, but I do think it's better for me than what other people say, despite its train wrecky nature, and that is The Amazing Race Australia 5. And again, this is a season that I actually think would have been good if it wasn't for the really terrible format. Again, obviously the format of this season is the worst part of it. Again, the fact that we are starting off with 14 teams, but then we add in 2 stowaways along the way, and we have a 24 episode season, which the middle episode of every week is essentially an automatic non-elimination round, and there's other non-elimination rounds along the way. Again, it is ridiculous. It is a terrible format for the show, especially when we also have like the team that wins the second episode of the week ends up being exempt from racing in the following leg. Like, that was a weird twist as well. And they also have the dole out the salvage or savage pass, and it can only be between the bottom 2, and like that was also a twist I didn't particularly like. Like, there's a lot of issues with this season from a pure format standpoint. I do think from a production standpoint, this is probably the worst season they've done, where again, as much as I criticize season 6, I do feel like from a production standpoint, they did make improvements in terms of how they formatted the show. I think the problem was that, again, the casting was really boring, and also I think COVID led to some unlucky circumstances. While with season 5 here, I think the biggest pro of this season is the casting. I think the casting is actually really strong. We're actually really like most of this cast. I liked Ashley and Amanda as this really strong female team. I like Jessica and Anurag as, again, this strong team early on that kind of peters out along the way, but they still make it to final 3. I thought they were pretty likable. Kristen and Alicia, I thought, had a really good underdog run of being left outside of like that majority group for a lot of it. Sky Boo and Jake, I thought, were really likable along the way. Holly and Delore were this like fun bickering couple, and their downfall at the very end is really, really fun to watch. I thought Jordan and Violetta were likable. Seth and Jessica were a fun team. Shane and Deb is like this big what if, where they were like super strong early on, though obviously have to be taken out. And really, again, like I really, really like this cast. But again, it is this terrible format that really harms this season. And also, I do think the Brendan Jackson win was really boring. I think, one, it's very predictable based on the editing, and also, again, not the most riveting team in the world for me. Also, again, like kind of lame to see the likes of like Stan and Wayne get added in relatively late into the season, though also really funny to see how bad they are despite them being propped up as this like really strong team. Though again, that's also what leads to a lot of the stagnation as they survive like 2 non-elims in a row. Like MJ and Chelsea, who were also added late, also have a great downfall through them being U-turned at the end and also getting lost. Again, that's fun as well. And for me, like this season just ends up being a pretty mixed bag. I do think if you just take the events of the race and these like storylines for a lot of these teams and condense it into a normally sized season, I do think it is a pretty good season of the show. But considering its elongated episode count, it does drop it for me to be at number 4 here. Now number 3, and if you can't tell, the top 3 are 3 pre-Network 10 seasons, which again shows you how I feel about the Network 10 seasons. But at number 3, I also have a season I still don't even like, and that is The Amazing Race Australia 1. And again, I feel like this is another season that's like kind of like season 4. Like I just struggled to care for a lot of this season. Now I feel like for me, this is kind of on the opposite side of things, where I feel like the early portion of the season was probably better than the back half of the season, where I feel like by the back half, it was just so clear that Tyler and Nathan were going to win. They were by far the best team on this season, despite some missteps here and there. I mean, again, it just felt like they were going to win. And even beyond that, I feel like one of my biggest issues with the back half of the season is that we're kind of left with all the boring teams by the back half of the season. Where for me, like the most interesting teams are teams that go out early. Teams like Mo and Mose and Richard and Joey. Chris and Anastasia go out in 6. And like beyond that, you're left with like all the boring teams. Obviously in second, you do have Sam and Renee, who do have a strong start, though do peter out, even though they do come in second. Though it is funny that this is Sam from Australian Survivor Championship Contenders 2, the one that's notable for getting 0 confessionals. And I will say, through watching this season, kind of get why. Again, not the most riveting TV in the world. But I mean, really, it's like, who are Matt and Tom? Like, who are Jeff and Luke? It's like these 2 like super forgettable male teams that make it really deep into the season. But again, I do feel like there are fun teams early on. Again, Mo and Mose were these fun like doofusy sort of guys. You have Richard and Joey, who are essentially this Dustin and Diana light sort of team of this team that, again, like mixed results, and by mixed I mean they have one good leg and the rest are pretty bad, but despite that do come off as more villainous figures or not liked by their cast, which leads to their eventual downfall. Chris and Anastasia, again, were a fun bickering couple, though it definitely did get icky at points, and Chris just comes off as a massive asshole across this season through his constant yelling at her, though, again, like there were points where they were entertaining, but really outside of that, I do feel like the rest of the cast just comes off as super unnotable, though, again, still at the end of the day, still above the quality of the Network 10 seasons in my eyes. Though again, I think if season 5 was more condensed, it would be above this season, but because it isn't, I do leave Australia 1 here at number 3. Now number 2, we're moving on to, again, the top 2, the only 2 good seasons of Amazing Race Australia in my eyes. And again, one is a top tier elite season of Amazing Race just in general. This one is still a very good one, but not quite on that level, and that is season 3, Australia versus New Zealand, which is really weird that they went through with this twist, but it is a smaller season, only 10 teams and only 10 episodes, but I do think it works out better for that. Now, I will say I don't love the overall theme. Like, I mean, like Australia versus New Zealand is not bad inherently. However, I don't like how much they really like lean into the theme, where again, we literally start the race with a tug of war between the Australian and New Zealand teams, which just seemed ridiculous. And later on, we do still have like these tasks where they're broken up into these groups, and that gives all the teams from like one side of it an advantage. I really didn't like that aspects of the race. However, I think as a whole, this is a great season. I think this is a great, like, kind of train wrecky season to a degree. I mean, like, Daniel and Ryan are pretty obvious winners from the beginning. These guys that are kind of on a moral high ground, though you could tell the Australian public would have loved them. Again, I think as a whole, this is a really strong cast. You got like Sally and Tyson, who are just like really likable dating couple. You got Ashley and Jared, who were not as likable, though were pretty strong racers, though obviously like very prone to mistakes. Carla and Henry were pretty strong underdog team that like kept on scraping by. You had Kat and Jesse, who were the likable kind of like middle-aged married couple. You had John and Murray, who were a really insane team, and that, again, we're the big villains for this season, but their track record is really, really strong despite them only coming in 6, where they have 3 first place finishes, 2 second place finishes, and then obviously their 6th place that eliminates them. But again, they have a shocking exit. You have Emily and Jonna, who also have a really shocking exit right before them. And their rivalry with John and Murray was really funny, especially because like they're both New Zealand teams. So it was funny to see the two strongest teams on the race at that point be these two New Zealand teams on a season that was supposed to be about national pride. We have this inner conflict between them. Again, I found that to be kind of humorous. But again, Emily and Jono have like a spectacular downfall as well, with him like gassing out due to dehydration and him getting into these fights with John, and all that was really, really great. You also have Aston and Christy, which was this like really weird team with like Christy lashing out at her partner constantly and having this like tantrum and all that was just really weird. And you have the first boots in Igna and Taharna, who I thought had a pretty fun exit as well. I thought the first episode was pretty good, where Sally and Tyson were kind of on the bottom for a lot of it, but then they really come out of nowhere and pass Igna and Taharna when they have to go back for a ring, and like all that was really great as well. Again, like for me, I just really felt like this season really had it all. Like I think it had a fantastic cast. I think it had really fun dynamics with the people within the teams, but also with conflicts between other teams. And really just had some really interesting results as well. Where I think at the end of the day, it would have been nice to not have all final three teams be from Australia, especially when, like, to me, I felt like the New Zealand teams were the more entertaining ones of the bunch. But even the Australian teams that make it far, like, are pretty good as well. So again, like, I feel like as a whole, again, for me, really strong season of The Amazing Race Australia, one of the few, and it is here number 2. And at number 1, the best season of The Amazing Race Australia is not even close. Again, like, for me, I do like season 3, but again, outside that, all those other seasons are all bottom tier seasons of Amazing Race. But here we're getting into a truly elite season, one that I think is really the only season to rival the likes of Amazing Race US 5 for me. This season have an incredible cast, really great results, great storylines throughout it, and that season is The Amazing Race Australia 2. Which, I mean, whenever you hear someone talk about this season, it is always talked about as one of the all-time great seasons. However, again, I do feel like it is a season that probably doesn't get as much recognition as it should. Again, like, it is a truly fantastic season from beginning to end. Like, really just better than I could have ever imagined it to be. I've been very vocal about not liking Australian TV and how they produce their television shows. I mean, when looking at like the old Australian Survivor seasons and looking how bad those are, that's kind of the level of quality I was expecting from these early Amazing Race Australia seasons. But again, Amazing Race Australia 2 really is near perfect. Like, I don't think there's a single like true dud of this entire cast. Now, there are definitely teams that stand out more than others. Really, this cast is incredible. And Paul and Steve are two of the best villains, and really just, I guess it's mostly Paul, but some of the best villains in the history of The Amazing Race. And they have such an interesting trajectory, too, where they were almost the first boots of the season, barely edge out Lucy and Amelia, and beyond that, end up eventually getting 5 first-place finishes in a row, coming in second place, and having numerous rivalries across the season, with this being one of the few seasons where even after the winner is declared, you still have drama, where you still have Paul and Steve and Michelle and Joe trying to wrap up their rivalry with them still hating each other and trying to figure out which of the two is going to come in second place. And I thought that was a fun dynamic there. And again, you obviously have their rivalry with Joseph and Grace as well, which leads to a pretty big fight between Paul and Grace, which again, you rarely see in Amazing Race. I thought Michelle and Joe was a really likable, like, female-female team. It definitely had a lot of potential coming into the end, though obviously doesn't quite pull off the win. I mean, Shane and Andrew, I will say, like, the winners of the season, like, probably one of my least favorite teams on the season, but even they were fine. Certainly not unlikable. It's just, I personally was more entertained by other teams here. Again, Joseph and Grace, like, I think Grace is like one of the best casting choices in all of The Amazing Race. Lucy and Amelia have a really strong underdog run throughout the season, where they come in 5th place and never once finish above 5th place, which is really funny. They literally start off being saved by the salvage pass at the very beginning, and then get numerous second to last finishes. And again, that's a really fun run there, and they're just really fun personality as well. And we do get that fun moment of them being arrested for accidentally driving into the Royal Palace, and that was funny. James and Sarah are really incredible TV, and Sarah in particular, again, another really incredible casting choice there, and they had a really fun dynamic. And again, even the other teams like Sticky and Sam, Ross and Taryn, Sue and Teresa, Kim and Donna, like, they were all solid casting choices as well. Again, like, definitely not the most riveting TV in the world, but again, they were still fine. And like Adam and Dane were these like really great shock first boots of these two like really athletic guys that you would assume would like do very well on the show, but they just like shockingly go out first after getting a penalty, and that was a really great downfall for them. But again, it really is a season with like so many like fun, notable moments throughout it. You do have, again, that first leg, the ending of it, where like Paul has this like meltdown during the raft building, and for them to have this like come from behind finish there, that was really interesting. Him also seemingly accidentally bumping into Grace immediately after their fight, and through that really sparks their rivalry even more. And you also have this like Paul and Steve rivalry of Kim and Donna, where Paul accidentally knocks over their pots, and that's a fun storyline. And we have this rivalry also between Joseph and Grace and Sarah and James, to where they steal their taxi and remove their bags from the taxi, which leads to them getting a penalty anyway. And again, that was a really fun scene. We get like a lot of fun downfalls across this season, with Kim and Donna getting so lost that they end up spending the night in their car, and Grant has to go and find them. Same thing goes with Joseph and Grace, who get eliminated after running out of money, and their cab takes them all the way to Mongolia, and they get eliminated. Sarah and James, who get eliminated because they didn't have enough money to pay their taxi. And again, there's a lot of like really fun moments across this season, with some really all-time great characters for The Amazing Race, and some really, really fun results. Again, to me, this is a truly elite season of The Amazing Race. One that I really did not expect that The Amazing Race Australia was even capable of having. And because that, for me, it is here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every season of The Amazing Race Australia. As I mentioned, I have watched every English language series of The Amazing Race at this point, to where the only two now that I have to talk about are The Amazing Race Asia and China Rush. And I will be doing videos on those series down the road. However, I will say it will probably be a big wait between now and then, mainly because there are a lot of videos that are a bit more time sensitive coming up that I want to do. Well, those videos obviously are not time sensitive because, I mean, who cares about Amazing Race Asia and China Rush at this point? But again, expect the season ranking for Asia and a broader video about China Rush at some point down the road. I'm probably looking at next year, but we'll see. Also, beyond that, I would not be opposed to doing more international Amazing Race based videos, like maybe a top 10 teams globally. I think that might be a fun video at some point. And obviously the Amazing Race 34 is currently going on. I am going to be covering that, so expect a review when that season is done as well. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.